Few video game franchises carry the cultural weight and emotional legacy of Final Fantasy. Since its inception in 1987, the series has become synonymous with epic storytelling, imaginative world building, and ever-evolving gameplay mechanics. From the pixelated charm of Final Fantasy I to the blockbuster spectacle of Final Fantasy XVI, the franchise has never shied away from reinventing itself. But as of 2025, Final Fantasy stands at a crossroads. The series is split between multiple identities, each with its own audience and expectations. There's a traditional turn-based legacy, the cinematic action of the mainline titles, the sprawling MMO of Final Fantasy XIV, and the nostalgia-fueled remake of trilogy of the Final Fantasy VII. These are not merely different games, they represent competing philosophies within the same brand. Today, I want to examine the current state of Final Fantasy, dissecting the franchise's present form through the four major pillars: mainline games, Final Fantasy XIV, remakes, and spin-offs, and the fan expectations in the future. We'll explore how Square Enix is navigating this fragmented identity, the challenges it faces in changing gaming landscape, and what it lies ahead for this iconic series. Hello everyone, my name is Fedro and this is cozyfeji, and on this channel we cover a variety of things such as video essays, reviews, JRPGs, and all things cozy gaming. Now for me, when it comes to Final Fantasy, in terms of my relationship with it, it's still relatively new. My first time playing a Final Fantasy game was with Final Fantasy XVI. And I absolutely loved my experience with that game. When I first played the demo, even before playing that demo, the hype going into this game was real and palpable. And when I played the demo, it really solidified my want to play this game on day one. And I did. And I literally played that game for nonstop for like 2 weeks straight. And I enjoyed every last bit of it. It got me really excited to play the other Final Fantasy games in my repertoire or in my collection. However, with that game, there was a lot of critique and a lot of fan reaction and feedback to it, whether or not was it considered a true Final Fantasy, was it even considered a true JRPG, and whether or not Final Fantasy and Square Enix are going down this weird path when it comes to their mainline titles, especially with the remake being also a very controversial but also well-loved series. So today I want to talk about the current state of Final Fantasy and where it heads to in the future. As again, like I said before, I'm still very and relatively new to the franchise, so I may not hold nostalgia for older titles, but I wanted to talk about it in my experience and did a little more research to it as well. The only experience that, again, like I mentioned before, I've played Final Fantasy 16, 15, 13, and a little bit of 12, and a little bit of the MMO. So I have more experience with the more modern and recent titles. I don't really have any experience with the older titles. Many people have grown up with this franchise. It is the JRPG franchise that got them into JRPGs, got them into video games. I'm really curious as to how the company and the Square Enix is going to go moving forward now with all these different critiques and how they want to step up their game with AAA games, how they want to move forward with remakes and other games that may possibly get remakes in the future, like, I don't know, Final Fantasy IX, or maybe their spin-offs like Final Fantasy Tactics and whatnot. So let's go dive deeper into what makes Final Fantasy and where we are going into the future. Chapter 1, Mainline Final Fantasy, Identity Crisis or Evolution. Final Fantasy XVI and the Cinematic Shift. When Final Fantasy XVI was released in June 2023, it marked a dramatic shift in tone, gameplay, and structure. Developed by Creative Business Unit 3 and helmed by Naoki Yoshida, known for his work on Final Fantasy XIV, 16 was Square Enix's most mature and westernized Final Fantasy to date. Inspired by dark fantasy narratives like Game of Thrones, it leaned heavily into real-time combat, political intrigue, and cinematic set pieces. Critically, 16 received positive reception. Reviewers praised its visuals, voice acting, soundtrack composed by Masayoshi Soken, and bold thematic risks. However, among the fan base, reactions were mixed. Many longtime fans expressed disappointment at the lack of RPG elements. The game's structure was linear, its world segmented, and its party system virtually non-existent, a stark contrast to earlier entries like Final Fantasy X or Final Fantasy VII. The traditional Final Fantasy tropes, turn-based battles, job systems, and exploration had been replaced with high-octane action reminiscent of Devil May Cry. This raised the question, what does it mean to be a Final Fantasy game in 2025? Square Enix has argued that reinvention is part of the series' DNA. No two Final Fantasy titles are exactly alike, and experimentation has always been key to its identity. Yet the shift toward action RPGs has alienated part of the fan base that values the franchise's strategic, methodical past. The sale numbers also reflected this tension. While 16 performed well initially, its long-term commercial success was underwhelming compared to Final Fantasy 15. It suggested that pushing too far into the action genre might limit the franchise's broader appeal. The identity tug-of-war. What's clear is that the mainline Final Fantasy series is in a state of flux. Square Enix is trying to balance traditional storytelling with modern game design trends, particularly the growing dominance of action-oriented mechanics and cinematic presentation. This evolution isn't inherently bad. Games must grow to survive, but the shift risks homogenizing Final Fantasy into generic action RPG, losing what once made it unique. The challenge for Square Enix is to modernize while maintaining the heart of the series: emotional storytelling, party dynamics, and thoughtful world building. So right now, Square Enix is in this really weird gray area where they want to appease to, of course, their true and hardcore loyal fan base. However, they also want to branch out and renovate like they always do with each title, and also appeal to a bigger and broader audience. They try to do that Final Fantasy 16, and it kind of found itself in this weird space where a lot of new fans really loved this game. I was someone who absolutely loved this game, and since I had no nostalgia or had experience playing the older titles, I didn't have any preconceived notions or anything or biases holding me back from enjoying this title. Not saying that people who enjoyed older games didn't enjoy this title, but it felt really mixed feelings with a lot of fans and newer fans alike. And with the course with the remake of Final Fantasy VII, that kind of pushes that kind of more butting heads between the fans and the developers more, because Final Fantasy VII is a well-beloved game from back in the day, and now with the remake trilogy, it's kind of also brought in some more mixed views as well. I've heard many of people say that Final Fantasy VII Remake is the true, authentic, and definitive way to play Final Fantasy VII, saying that it fleshes out so much more that the developers couldn't do back in 1997. However, there's also a good chunk of people who say that if you really want to enjoy Final Fantasy VII for what it really is, play the original. So like I said, we're kind of in this weird imbalance of whether or not they should move forward and change or stick to what they know best. Chapter 2, Final Fantasy XIV, the beating heart of the franchise. From catastrophe to cult classic. If the mainline series is in flux, Final Fantasy XIV is thriving. Its story is well known. Final Fantasy XIV launched in 2010 to a disastrous reviews, clunky mechanics, poor UI, and uninspired quests doomed it almost immediately. But instead of abandoning the game, Square Enix did something remarkable. They tore it down and rebuilt it from the ground up. The result was Final Fantasy XIV: A Realm Reborn in 2013, a game that not only saved the franchise's reputation, but became one of the greatest comebacks in gaming history. Dawn Trail and a new era. In 2024, Final Fantasy XIV entered a new chapter with its Dawn Trail expansion. After the emotionally heavy climax of Endwalker, which wrapped up in a decade-long narrative arc, Dawn Trail offered players a breath of fresh air. Its story took a lighter tone, introducing new continents, races, and lore that promised exploration over existentialism. Under the leadership of Naoki Yoshida, Final Fantasy XIV has struck a remarkable balance between innovation and tradition. It has incorporated modern MMO mechanics while preserving deep lore, character-driven storytelling, and meaningful community interactions. Where the mainline series seems torn between identities, Final Fantasy XIV is confident in its own. Its continued success proves that there's still a passionate audience for story-rich, RPG-first experiences, even in a genre often dominated by grind and monetization. Community and culture. Perhaps the most powerful aspect of Final Fantasy XIV is its community. The game has become a social space, a virtual home for millions. Events like FanFest, charity drives, in-game weddings, and player-created concerts have made of FF14 more than just a game. It's a culture. While other games chase virality of trends, Final Fantasy XIV continues to build on long-term trust, transparency, and quality. In many ways, it represents the soul of Final Fantasy more than any mainline entry today. Now, I know that Final Fantasy XIV has its huge fan base and lovers of that game. There are plenty of people who've only played Final Fantasy XIV and have not even dabbled in the other actual mainline entries in the franchise. However, there has been a lot of mixed reactions with this new and most recent expansion, saying that's really dull, it's pretty boring, there's not much going on in comparison to the pretty large epic that was the last expansion. And with the last expansion, Endwalker, that came out right in the smack dab in the middle of a pandemic, so there was a lot more people who had more time, and with FF14 being so generous with their free trial, there was a lot of people playing that game at the time, and so the hype was really at its peak with Dawn Trail, but it didn't really live up to expectations, so a lot of fans are also kind of in limbo as to where Final Fantasy XIV is at as well. Just because Final Fantasy XIV is a long-running game, over a 10-year-old plus game, so it's really interesting to see where that game is going as well, also falling in the line of where the Square Enix are kind of at a loss as to whether or not where they want to go in the direction of that game as well. And it also bleeds into the remakes as well. Chapter 3. Remakes and Reimaginings. Nostalgia with a Twist. The Remake Project. The Final Fantasy VII Remake Project is perhaps Square Enix's most ambitious undertaking of the decade. Announced in 2015 and released in 2020, FF7 Remake was more than a graphical update. It was a complete reimagining of the original story, expanding the Midgar section into a full-length game with real-time combat and new lore elements. The second installment, Final Fantasy Rebirth, launched in early 2024. It continued the reinterpretation of the original story, introducing large open areas, optional side quests, and a dynamic battle system that blended traditional strategy with flashy action. But while the remake trilogy has been praised for its visuals, music, and emotional storytelling, it has also sparked controversy. Major plot deviations, timeline confusion, and multiverse implications have divided fans. For some, these narrative risks add new layers of meaning. For others, they betray the simplicity and the clarity of the original. Nostalgia versus innovation. The remake series embodies a broader struggle in modern gaming: how to honor nostalgia while pushing forward. Square Enix's approach has been to reinterpret rather than reproduce. But this approach alienates purists who wanted a one-to-one recreation and raises philosophical questions about authorship, canon, and fan expectations. Still, it's hard to deny the impact of Remake series. It has brought the Final Fantasy VII to a new generation and revived interest in the franchise at large. Whether the final installment will stick the landing remains to be seen, but the project is a bold, if polarizing, experiment. Now, Final Fantasy and Square Enix are not new to this. Many developers are really pushing for the remake era right now. Within the past 5 years or so, we've seen nothing but remakes in the JRPG genre. And hey, I'm not mad. As someone who didn't really play many JRPGs or any JRPGs at all back in the day, it's really fun to be able to play these older classics in a new fresh coat of paint. However, it kind of goes into this weird category or weird phase where, are they kind of being lazy? Or are they just trying to explore new ideas or explore some aspects of the games that they couldn't do back in the day? Remakes are in this weird flux, and I made a video talking about we're in this era of remakes, and like I said, Square Enix is not new to this. You see Atlas doing this, and other franchises and companies doing this as well. So it's really weird and interesting to see how remakes are kind of a dime in the dozen, and it really depends on the fan and the player and the gamer themselves, whether or not and how they perceive them or not. I think remakes are all good and dandy, but I definitely do think there's definitely room for new IP and new ideas to flourish as well. Chapter 4. Spinoffs, Mobile, and Media Expansion. Expanding the universe. Beyond mainline games and remakes, Final Fantasy continues to spread into other media and genres. Mobile titles like Final Fantasy Brave Exvius, War of the Visions, and Ever Crisis have built loyal player bases. Through they have also been drawn criticism for aggressive monetization. Ever Crisis in particular was an attempt to offer a more traditional, episodic experience across mobile and PC platforms. While its presentation and soundtrack earned praise, its reliance on gacha mechanics frustrated fans who hoped for a more respectful take on the classic Final Fantasy gameplay. Meanwhile, Final Fantasy has continued to branch into anime, such as Final Fantasy XV Brotherhood, films like Kingslave, and music tours. These efforts reinforce the brand's identity, but also risk oversaturation, especially if quality control falters. Crossovers and collaborations. Square Enix has also embraced collaborations, bringing Final Fantasy content into games like Fortnite, Power Wash Simulator, and Fall Guys. These games are often fun novelties, but they further blur the franchise's images. Is Final Fantasy an epic RPG saga, or a culture brand that can be plugged into anything? The more Square Enix expands, the more it must ask, how do you protect the essence of a story-driven RPG series while adapting to an increasingly fragmented entertainment landscape? It goes without saying that Final Fantasy is a juggernaut and a well-known established JRPG franchise. I feel like anyone who is a JRPG lover or someone who's not even a JRPG fan knows Final Fantasy, and they've sinked into their teeth in all aspects of media. Whether that is a good thing or not, and whether or not it helps the reputation or the brand itself is up to interpretation. But it is really fascinating to see a very big powerhouse blend and morph into so many different aspects and avenues. Chapter 5, The Future of Final Fantasy. Challenges ahead. Final Fantasy in 2025 is in a brand with multiple identities. The cinematic action of RPG, the story-rich MMO, and the nostalgia-driven remake, as well as the experimental mobile spin-offs. Each identity appeals to different segments of the fan base, but rarely do they intersect. This fragmentation makes it difficult to define what Final Fantasy truly is anymore. Moreover, Square Enix faces industry-wide challenges, raising development costs, shifting player expectations, and fierce competition from Western and Eastern studios alike. Games like Elden Ring, Persona 5, and Genshin Impact have influenced the RPG genre in different ways, and Final Fantasy must continually prove its relevance. Hope and reinvention. Yet despite its identity struggles, Final Fantasy remains a franchise full of potential. The next decade will likely see more crossover between traditional and modern elements. A potential Final Fantasy XVII could blend the best of both worlds. Deep character-driven storytelling with modern gameplay systems that don't just sacrifice depth for spectacle. Fan feedback will also be crucial. Square Enix has shown willingness to adapt when necessary, Final Fantasy XIV's rebirth being the prime example. And with younger developers and new creative voices joining the company, we may see a return to more experimental, heartfelt Final Fantasy games that take risks without abandoning their roots. I feel like right now is more important than ever, seeing what will Final Fantasy and Square Enix do next in the future when it comes to their future installments, spin-offs, and new IPs as well. I'm really curious as to what Final Fantasy is going to head to next and what Square Enix is going to do in their next moves going forward. Because right now, like I said, Final Fantasy and Square Enix is such a staple when it comes to JRPGs. They kind of are the forefathers, the founding fathers, and kind of what influences other JRPGs, whether that be AAA or bigger companies or even indie RPGs and companies as well. It's really important to see what they do next and how they handle it. Rather than focusing so much on big blockbuster titles, why don't they really focus on what they know best? Good story, good characters, and a good party. A franchise at a crossroads. In 2025, Final Fantasy is not one thing, it's many. It's the sprawling drama of 14, the cinematic dazzle of 16, the nostalgic renovation of 7, and the quiet legacy of the 1,000 stories told over decades. Some fans are more loyal to the past, others eager for the future. Some crave turn-based battles and airships, others want flashy combat and moral ambiguity. What unites them all is a desire for magic, for something that feels larger than life. And that's where Final Fantasy still shines. For all its struggles and growing pains, it remains a symbol of ambition in gaming. It dares to evolve, even when it stumbles. It believes in storytelling, even when the story is messy. The road ahead is uncertain, but one thing is clear. Final Fantasy is not done. Not even close. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. I had a really fun time making the script and diving deep more into Final Fantasy and what their current state is going on at Square Enix. Like I said before, Final Fantasy is a I feel like a founding father and a figurehead when it comes to JRPG genre, and many of those and many other companies and indies alike look up to this franchise, and I would hate to see it kind of fall into the cracks. I really hope that this franchise and the company continues to flourish and gives us great stories and good characters and great combat. I would love to know what your opinions are on the current state of Final Fantasy and Square Enix. Also, what's your favorite Final Fantasy title and what you hope to see in the future. If you guys enjoyed this video, do not forget to hit the like and subscribe button, and I can't wait to see you guys in the next one. Bye!